Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We have moved to the defensive side of the ball on our roster evaluations. Defensive line is up today, so we're going to talk about the interior guys mostly. We're going to leave the edge rushers to another show, but we're going to hit on the defensive ends as well if you want to lump it all together. And it should be a fun show, talking about some scheme stuff, the coaching, which I think is going to be a huge factor this year, some of the new players that we've got added to what we already had last year. And then I want to talk about some of the stats of last year and where we might see some improvement this year. Hopefully it's all across the board, but we'll talk about it.
Everywhere, because the defense was just awful last year.
Yeah, it was. How you doing, Keith, man?
I'm doing all right. So you want to start with the coaching stuff, or I kind of wanted to start with the idea that it's Seahawks forever have been a 4-3, and so we're used to the word defensive end being pass rusher, whereas with the switch to the 3-4, defensive end is just they're just another defensive tackle. These are all the big bodies, and the edge rushers, the guys that come off the edge and are the pass rushers, are the outside linebackers now, which I know is a little weird to think about for fans that have been, watching the Seahawks for decades and seeing them, play a 4-3 for almost all of it. So it's just something.
Well, and it gets even more complicated than that, because they run multiple fronts.
Oh yeah, they do.
And stunts and so forth. So it can be very confusing. You want to say it's a 3-4 defense, but really it's a hybrid. They're going to run some 4-3 fronts and some 5-2s and just some crazy stuff. But in essence, though, it's there's certain types of players that you're going to talk about, guys that are over a certain weight or tend to play on the interior, coming in from the interior in the A and B gaps, as opposed to lining up outside. Now today, part of this conversation will be mostly 0-1 techs, 3 techs. You're going to hear a lot of that. But the 5 techs are kind of the base defensive end guys that we've got. The Leonard Williamses, the Dre Jones, yeah, Miles Adams, some of the new guys. So, I wanted to talk about the coaching kind of first, and maybe some of the stats, because I think that lays the framework for what we're really talking about here. Because we got plenty of time to talk about the players, but Mike McDonald's the new head coach. We've got an entirely new scheme, both on offense and defense. We've got new defensive line coaches. We've got a defensive coordinator, quote unquote, kind of in name only this year, but we'll see how that evolves over time. But Mike McDonald comes in after essentially leading the Ravens to the best defense the last couple seasons in a number of different categories. And the Seahawks were essentially, somewhere in between 25th and 30th, depending on which stats you're looking at. I mean, they had the 25th worst points allowed team in the NFL. So points is what it's all about in the NFL.
Weren't they 32nd against the run last year?
Yeah, so let me go through this a little bit. So they allowed 371 points per game. That was 30th. Opponents' yards per play, 5.5, which was 24th. Third down conversion was 31st. Red zone scoring was 24th. Against the run, rush yards per play, 4.6, which was 27th. Opponents' rushes per game, 30.3 rushes per game was 29th. Rush allowed yards rushing against us was 138.4, which was 31st. So not quite as bad as 32nd, but yeah, there.
But 30,
and the pass defense was just, so that was really bad. I mean, that was the nut that I don't think that the team could really overcome. In fact, I'm shocked that we got to 9 wins, just because when you have a defense that's that bad, and you go look at the offense as well, where we disappointed. It's hard to get to 500 when you have teams that are below league average, both on offense and defense. I don't know how they did it. So in passing, They had allowed a completion percentage of 66.67, which was 26th. Yards per pass, they ranked 24th. Passing yards allowed, they ranked 22nd. They also ranked 22nd in takeaways. They were just bad overall. When you go look at the offensive side, it was 15th to 22nd, more or less, on the offensive side. We expected that unit to be a top 10, just kind of carry the team a little bit, and the defense to be a little better than they were, given the personnel that we had. It just didn't happen. So Mike McDonald comes in.
Those numbers that you were saying for the defense, that is why Pete Carroll is no longer the coach of this team, because he's
and Clint Hurt is no longer the defensive coordinator.
Well,
yeah, no, you're right. It's a larger issue. Yeah,
Clint Hurt has more to do with Pete Carroll not being part of the team, but really, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And this was supposed to be a defensive coaching staff, and they were supposed to be able to get that defense like figured out and being among the best, and said they were among the worst. And what you were starting to say was like the talent that this team had. There's no way they should have been that bad, but they were. And one of the things that Pete Carroll said when he was doing his like exit press conference was that, he was talking about like Jody Allen and the people above, and he's like, oh, sometimes they don't remember that these coaches are people, and they've relocated their families and whatnot. And he definitely made it sound like they were like, Clint Hurt and the defensive staff's got to go. And Pete said no. And I said, well, then you're going. And so, yeah, I mean, it really comes down to that defensive performance is why Pete's not the coach anymore.
And loyalty at this point in this moment for Pete, loyalty trumped quality, and year after year that happened. And I get Pete's loyalty, I really do. I get it as a human. You want to have that, but you can't have that dominate your equation. You've still got to come out with a quality product, especially in the NFL, and things change rapidly and so forth. The expectation level should always have been, hey, we want to be the best defense in the NFL. Number one against the run, number one against the pass, number one overall. And it just never was. It was always kind of this little sort of nepotism kind of mentality where Pete didn't want to go outside. He wanted to kind of bring the guys up. Now I get developing coaches. I'm all for that. But if they're not going to work out, if they're not any good, you need to be able to recognize that and move on quickly. Now, he did move on over the years from different coaches and different times and so forth. But for whatever reason, he had a soft spot for Clint Hurt, and he was not good. He just was not good. So this regime comes in, Mike McDonald, we know kind of what to expect because we've got the Ravens defense, but it's a completely different personnel aspect to this team. So you're going to kind of have a little bit of a hybrid thing going on. But I would imagine it's going to be based on similar tendencies and similar sets that Mike McDonald wants to do. A lot of it has to do with the way that he coaches the defense and teaches the defense, allows players to kind of learn everyone else's positions. They disguise a lot of things. They run different plays with different personnel settings from all over the place. And so it's very confusing for offenses and so forth. So really kind of anxious to see how that translates in Seattle. Some of the other coaching things like Leslie Frazier coming in, I think is a total underrated signing that most people really aren't talking about. But here's a guy with 25 years of coaching experiences. In his last 6 seasons with the Buffalo Bills as their coordinator, his units ranked in the top 6 in yards per game 4 times, top 2 3 times in points per game. First in the NFL in both yards allowed and points allowed in 2021. I mean, this is a guy that really knows how to get things done.
I was like, let's not forget his head coaching experience too. For a guy as young as Mike McDonald, who's only got 2 years as an NFL coordinator, 3 years overall as a coordinator, on his career, having that experience, someone to come in and just kind of behind the scenes help keep things organized in the right way and make sure that that details aren't missed is going to be huge. It's just going to be
Yeah.
absolutely huge for a guy like Mike McDonald, who's really smart and just absolutely brilliant as a coordinator. But being a head coach is a different beast, and so um, yeah, I just think that was an incredible signing, was to be able to get a guy like Leslie Frazier to come in and help him. I mean, when you see the good when young coaches like that are come in and do great things, they tend to have that veteran behind the scenes, that assistant head coach back there, even if it's only just for the first couple of years, but it just helps to get the coach um, on the ground and moving and doing their thing.
Do you remember, after Pete was fired, the thing that came out was, well, he's going to be an advisor. That never really completely panned out at all. I mean, I've not seen him associated with anything around the team. Didn't
Nope.
help out during the draft. Isn't helping out with OTAs, etc. Pete's gone. I mean, that's the way it is. And then they hired a defensive coordinator that used to be the defensive line coach for the Dallas Cowboys the last 3 years, Aiden Durd. And he's actually a Brit, comes over from England. He went through that kind of program in the NFL to assist outside coaches, international type stuff. And then he spent some time with Dan Quinn prior to Dallas when he was in Atlanta as well. And then Justin Hines is the defensive line coach. Don't know much about him. He's got a fairly short resume in the NFL, more in college, but he was an assistant defensive line coach for the Bears for a couple seasons prior to his gig here with Seattle. So that's kind of the guys that are going to be mostly in front of this defensive line this year. What do you expect overall from this unit this year as far as improving on those stats I just talked about?
Well, I think we're just going to see guys in position to make plays a lot more often. You're going to see a lot less rigidity here. You have to stand in this one spot, and more allowing guys to go and make plays and plus you're just going to see guys coming from different angles and different spots, and they're going to move around. One of the things you see from in Baltimore's defense the last couple of years is just because you know who's in the defensive huddle doesn't mean you know where they're lining up. And guys would line up in weird spots, and it didn't matter. And so they would do what they felt would give them mismatches, what they would add, what things where they could add confusion and those kind of things in order to try and generate pressure or penetration or whatever they needed. So I like the creativity. Going back and rewatching Baltimore games, I really like the creativity that McDonald shows with the defense, and we're going to see a lot of that.
So there were a few players on this team this season that were with us last year. Leonard Williams came over on a mid-season trade and then re-signed with Seattle this season. Jerron Reed came last season to kind of improve against the run and generate some interior pass rush. That didn't work. Whatever they were doing last year just didn't really work. Now they did end up, with a middle of the NFL kind of pass rush win rate and sack percentage, but overall they couldn't really do anything else well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very inconsistent, and stopping the run was just probably the overarching large problem because teams knew that they could run against Seattle. And that's why you saw such a large run percentage against them compared to every other team in the league.
Well,
So
your
let's
teams
talk
knew they
about,
could run against Seattle, and so then, but then that just opened up, like, our linebackers had a hard time covering naturally, and now you have them gearing up to come up and try and stop the run because they're so bad at, as a team they're so bad against the run, and it just made those coverage problems even worse, because they were a step late in their adjustment, and when they're already slow and can't cover, it just meant that teams just ate up Seattle in the middle of the field with that passing game. So those things just kind of played off each other, and it really came down to if they could have stopped the run in the beginning, it could have definitely made life easier for Bobby Wagner and the linebackers in the middle, and maybe shorten up some of that stuff. But they could not stop the run for anything. It was just awful down the stretch.
So between a free agent signing and a draft pick, that's really going to be the big difference on the defensive line this year. Jonathan Hankins comes over as a nose tackle. He was at the Cowboys. Aiden Dard was able to coach him there. 6'3", 320 plus pounds, a true nose tackle. He's a little older now, drafted in 2013, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And not really a great grade. Wasn't on the field for a lot of snaps, but played about a third of the time there. But it's just kind of a nice veteran presence to have on the team, a guy you can plug in there and kind of take up double teams, give some other guys a break. Probably as a 2-down player at most in this system. So it's nice to have that. Kind of been pining for a true defensive tackle on the team for a while. And
they also replaced Brian Monet, who was kind of expected to be that nose tackle last year, but was never healthy, which they never really should have expected it given the injury that he was coming off and those kind of things. But the other nose tackle that they've got, Matt Gattel, at 6'1", 341, is just a huge guy. And his ability to, kind of be that backup, give Hankins a break when he needs one late in games, or if Hankins gets hurt. Just having that second guy, like they didn't have one guy last year. This year they're gonna have two.
And I'm not sure where Cameron Young is as far as his weight. I know that they really want to have him. He's pretty much just a 0 to 3 tech, but mostly a 0-1 kind of guy on the very, very interior, shading over the center mostly.
Yeah, but that was with the other coaching staff. We don't know where this one wants to play him.
Right.
So.
Right. But that's kind of where his skill set is too. He's not a very long, twitchy guy. So he's definitely going to play somewhere in the interior. Jaron Reed is back. He's kind of a steady, does everything okay and pretty well. Not tremendous or great in any one thing, which is a fine player to have on this team as a rotation guy. Plus tons of experience that he can pass on. And then the draft pick, Keith, which I thought, Seattle kind of lucked into that. They can't control the 15 teams that were in front of them as far as how the draft picks went. But there's Byron Murphy sitting there when they're picking at 16 on the clock. They may have had some trade back options or whatever, but he's there. You're going to take that kid. Byron Murphy comes in with just these mammoth tree trunk legs at 6 foot 308. And he's going to be all over the place. Kind of, you had mentioned, I think Geno Atkins is probably a great comp for him. I'm not sure if you want to comp the guy that left the Rams.
Everyone's been comping him to Aaron Donald because of
but he's got the same body. He's got the same build, but the skill sets are a little different. And you don't want to comp a guy that's is a Hall of Famer, but
which is hard because with the guy that he reminds me more of than Aaron Donald is Warren Sapp, who is also a Hall of Famer. So I got to be careful making that comp too. But yeah, I mean, he is shorter, but he's got long arms for his height, so he'll be able to keep the blockers off his body a little bit. But he's so just compact and twitchy and powerful. There's literally just it's going to be really hard for anybody to stop him. He's just he's both quick and powerful, and he's just going to eat up guards.
I like it.
And I mean, he's just a guy that you're going to have to double team. If you don't want him in your backfield, you have to double team him, and that's why he was the 16th overall pick.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's going to really change things. I really do. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of the year, he's the best player on the field. And I don't say that lightly because Witherspoon is on this defense. But I think he's going to end up impacting games more than any other player on this team by the time it's all said and done. And it's a good thing to have. I mean, this is the type of player you kind of build a defense around, and he's on the defensive line, and he's going to be an interior guy. And I couldn't be happier because when you really think about the type of defense that Mike McDonald runs, or even Pete Carroll did, you need a guy like this, to make it all work and take on double teams and allow other players to
Leonard
be
Williams
the heroes.
was supposed to be that guy, though. The
Yeah,
guy
true.
that is so good that he makes it all work.
But Leonard Williams was never I achieved that sort of stature since he's been in the NFL, since he was drafted. He was always kind of, who was the other guy that was on the Jets there? Quinnen Williams. One of those guys was ended up being a better player, and Leonard Williams was, available for trade for a reason. I think that he's a solid player, no doubt, but I think Byron Murphy, by the time the season's over, is going to be a better player than Williams, and certainly has the ceiling to exceed that for sure.
Well,
but I'm glad we have him.
Two of those guys on the roster at the same time. You can't double team both of them,
right? And then you have the edge rushers, which we're not going to talk about tonight, but you combine all of that together. That's where you kind of get excited about the opportunity for this defense to really take a jump, not just incrementally go from, the 25th or 28th best defense in the NFL up to 20th or whatever. I think they have a reasonable opportunity to, maybe not right out of the gate, because they're in a new system, new scheme, new language, etc. But certainly by game 8, this defense has an opportunity to be, top 15 for sure. And I thought they were going to be there last year with this same personnel. Now you add Byron Murphy, you're adding Jonathan Hankins, you're adding a few different pieces on the back end. It's exciting for me.
Yeah, they got significantly faster at linebacker. They got, it's all short-term contracts, but they got, in my opinion, better on the back end at safety. And then you add, the fact that they've now got nose tackles to make the 3-4 work, and a Byron Murphy, caliber talent up front.
And Nwasu only played 5 games last year.
You get him back for 5 games.
Yeah, God. You get him back for a full season. Plus, maybe Derek Hall takes a jump. Maybe Mike Morris surprises.
So that's a couple guys that we haven't mentioned yet as we're doing the line here. Mike Morris, who looked really good until he got hurt. Unfortunately, that was like before the season started, so we never really saw much of him. But what he looked like in camp and preseason, he looked like a guy that was a steal in the draft.
And these are all guys we're talking about are going to be like anywhere from 280 to 295 as far as weight is concerned.
Yeah, because these are the defensive ends. So Mike Morris, Dre Jones, who signed that big contract and then was kind of disappointing, but it was a lot of that had to do with his usage.
And the players around him. Yeah. He finished with 49 combined tackles and 4.5 sacks, but it seems like he should have a little bit more in the tank, but then you go back and you look at the stats from Denver and it's similar, as far as the stats, but how does the guy affect the game? Yeah. And I think with better players around him, especially Byron Murphy on the inside of him, will make all the difference in the world. And Leonard Williams too. Just having a guy like Byron Murphy on that line will be a huge difference maker.
Yep. One of the things that was interesting when I was reading stuff about OTAs is they said that Dre Jones has shed a little weight. He's down in the low 270s now instead of the low 280s.
Really?
And he's looking quick, and that the plan is for him to be that 5 tech, but then also occasionally be an outside linebacker, but just as a pure pass rusher, but just give him that edge where he can get around the edge a little bit. Let him line up a little wider, and have another player inside there,
So
and use that speed.
I didn't hear what his weight was, which was my reaction, but I knew that he was going to kind of switch positions a little bit, or at least expand where he can line up. And that they were the drills that specifically I was surprised at was that he was dropping back into coverage, which is what you're going to see in a Mike Macdonald. Now, we talked about that before, like 2 or 3 years ago. We were like, why in the heck are they dropping a 300-pound lineman into coverage? And that was just kind of part of the scheme.
300-pound lineman. They were dropping a 330-pound nose tackle in Puna Ford back into coverage. And that's just freaking stupid. But
but you are going to see defensive linemen drop into coverage in Mike Macdonald's scheme now and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's not going to be Hankins and Guttel.
Probably
it's going to be a guy like Dre Jones, who's he's in the 270 range, and
only on tight ends and
it's going to be on
running backs.
Yeah, it's going to be. He's not going to be chasing someone down the field. He's going to have a zone that he's got to cover, and he's got the quickness and the athleticism to do it, especially if he's no longer in the 280s.
Are you going to ask Leonard Williams to do the same thing?
I don't think so.
But they play the same position essentially.
They don't. Williams is going to be more 3. Jones is going to be more. He's only going to be a 5. He's not going to be much of a 3. But he's going to be a 5 and then an outside linebacker occasionally. And so, whereas Leonard's is going to be a 3 and occasionally a 5. So I don't think you're going to see Williams back in coverage. I don't think you're going to see much of any of the defensive line other than him. Maybe a guy like Miles Adams.
There's certainly a lot of chatter about the potential to trade Jones. You could save $11.5 million against the cap if you traded him with a post-June 1st designation.
Well, you don't even need to designate it now. I mean, we're essentially at June.
But I disagree in that I believe that Dre Jones is actually going to have a vastly improved season and potentially be one of the best weapons that Mike Macdonald has to use because of his scheme diversity. And because I think he's going to end up being one of the best stunt defensive linemen that they have, a guy that can line up outside and loop in inside to penetrate. I think that you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of little stunts and so forth. You're not going to know where guys are coming from. And Dre Jones has a real unique opportunity, I think, in this defense. I think Leonard Williams does too, but Dre Jones has got this, you mentioned the 272, 275. He comes in like that. He's got a real opportunity there to still line up at 3 tech. Maybe he loops outside. Maybe he comes back in. Really unique player with a unique skill set on this roster.
One of the things that I know we're going to go back to coaching. When Pete Carroll first came in, one of the things that he was really good at was looking at individual players and was like, okay, what do they do well? What's unique about them, and how can we take advantage of that? When was the last time that was true about a Seahawks team?
You'd have to go back to like 2015, Keith.
Yeah, you'd have to go back to
the year after the Super Bowl appearance, I think.
Yeah, so Chris Richard, when he was the defensive coordinator, once they moved on from him and brought Ken Norton back, and so the last 2 defensive coordinators in Seattle, they'd stopped doing that. That was no longer a trademark of Pete Carroll teams, and so having that idea that you're going to have a coaching staff that's going to look at individual guys and be like, what can these guys do really well, and how do we use that? That has me excited again, because that's how you get the most out of your players. It's not here's this like system that we're going to use, and that's all we do. And if you don't fit it, too bad. And
It really just helps you increase team speed. You're playing fast. Like when you're playing confident and you're doing things well, you can play fast. Like, and this defense is designed and taught to teach every player on the defense know where every other player is going to be and what their responsibilities are, because they have those responsibilities sometimes, depending on the call. And so it enables the defense to just swarm and play fast and hard.
That is one of the things that reading that, because when you know what everybody's doing and there's that much thought process in, that tends to slow down things because you're thinking a lot. But just the fact that is kind of the hallmark of this of what Mike McDonald wants. He wants everybody to know what everybody's doing. So any decision you make can be made based on the positioning of everyone else.
Right. But the way that he teaches it is simplified to the point where you're no longer spending the time processing. You just know it. And you know, I don't know if that's going to be the case first game, or if it's going to happen in preseason, or if it's going to happen in week 8. But at some point, everything's going to click, and it's going to be
happen in week 8.
That is a concern. There's no question. That's a concern.
But then in years 2+, you've always got guys there that already knew it from the previous year, and so
Keith, that's the key, really here.
Really fast. This first year might be a little bit of a adjustment, just because when you're asking the guys to learn a lot of stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, they just talked about the other day after an OTA practice, talked about the fact that his defensive scheme is 20% installed at this point. And you're at June 1st, essentially. And you've got, right? So you've got some time, but you've also got a lot of off time coming up.
I don't know. You're going to you say 20%. To me, that
he said 20%.
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. That's not where you want to be at this point. When you've got through OTAs,
true, not true.
You want to be at 80%, not 20%.
Well, they'll be there next year, but like you said, it's going to be a process. I think that seems realistic to me. I think Mike McDonald is kind of shoots from the hip. He's very realistic. He's going to tell you the way it is. 20% to me, while concerning, makes the most sense, and I'm actually thankful for it in a way, because they're not trying to cram it all in. They're trying to take a methodical approach, and if the team isn't ready to move forward to the next step, they're going to stay and they're going to learn it and they're going to get it right, and then they're going to go. Nobody falls behind. Nobody has question marks. That slows the thing down. They need to move together as a unit, not individual players. And so the 20% thing doesn't concern me. Now, if it's only 50% and we're in the first week of August, yeah, that's difficult, because if you've got 50% of your defense installed, you may be able to play a game, but you're going to be so limited in what you do and what you can do. And then there's limited opportunities to teach when the season starts. Yeah. So you're really handicapped, you know, very deep into the season. If they can get like 75 or 80% done by August 1st, now that's going to depend a lot on the players, because what's going to happen after the mandatories in June is everyone's going to go home for like 6-7 weeks, and they're going to have to learn. They're going to have to keep learning. And so a lot of this is going to be just on the players, what they do with that time.
Yeah, they're going to have to keep studying. And hopefully, you know, some of the younger players will be, instead of going home, they'll stick around the facility and continue to work out and do stuff there, and have access to the coaches, to, you know, work with them, talk to them, teach them, that kind of stuff. But, yeah, we'll see. I mean, we will. So with all of this, have you been surprised that there weren't more Baltimore players brought in via free agency?
Yes,
to help?
actually. Yeah. I don't, top of mind, not completely familiar with their players. Stone, Patrick Queen, some other players on the interior line, I'm familiar with, but there's only a handful of players, that are available in free agency and so forth. I was a little, I found it interesting that really nobody came. And the only person that has some familiarity is like Jonathan Hankins, because Artie was his defensive line coach in Dallas. But there's really nobody that came over for the language portion of Mike Macdonald's scheme to help with a certain position group. For example, like the defensive backs is kind of a unit within the defense that has to communicate almost on every play where they're lining up, how they're going to work. As maybe a linebacker as well. You would thought maybe even a second or third string linebacker that was on the Ravens for a couple seasons would have at least all of the lingo, could help with that in huddles and move players in the right spots and so forth. None of that though.
Yeah.
So it's not over yet. I mean, they could certainly bring somebody in, but there's probably not a lot of players out there right now available.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, because usually you'll see a coach when they come in and they bring in a system like that, they'll bring a couple of key guys that may not play. They may not even make the team, but you can tell that they're there to help the coaches. But because they already know the system, they already know what's going on. They can already point stuff out to other people, and it just gives you another set of eyes and another.
Does that tell you anything about the either one of these? The confidence that Mike Macdonald has in his coaching and teaching ability, or B, confidence in the existing roster to be able to pick this shit up?
I think a little of both. I think it does have something to do with basically, Schneider's making these calls and is like, I'm not going to bring in guys that are lesser quality just because they happen to have been coached by Mike Macdonald before. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And Macdonald didn't come in and say, no, I really need a couple of these guys, because he didn't feel like he needed it. But it's still interesting. It's still weird. One other guy there's one guy on this team that I think might actually apply to that, and that is Mike Morris, who played for Mike Macdonald when Macdonald was at Michigan, was their defensive coordinator for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Morris was a junior that year. So
yeah, it gives him a little leg up to me. Like he can play fast, like immediately. Yep. He gets it. He understands the language. He knows what the expectations are.
Somewhat, although the Michigan version of Macdonald's system was very much simplified compared to the Baltimore version. So, but still, he's at least been there. Some of the language will be the same. He'll be able to adapt fairly quickly. But I just thought that was kind of interesting.
So there's a few undrafted rookie free agents that were invited in. A couple of that came in for tryouts, and it actually worked out. Buda Jones is one of those guys, nose tackle, 6'3", 317 pounds, from Troy. He's really a strong, squatty build guy, even though he's 6'3". He's kind of a shorter looking 6'3" guy, 35 reps on the bench. And he actually was invited to the tryout and got a contract out of it. So it's another guy at the nose, Nathan Pickering, 6'2", 300 pounds, defensive, kind of a three-tech kind of a guy. He's coming in. Who was the other guy? Devere Levelston, 6'5", 289, ran a 4.8 40. He's more of a 5-tech or an outside linebacker. I think they want to transition to him.
They've listed him as 6'3", 281 on on .com, but yeah, I mean, he at 281. I mean, that's a 5-tech, right? But what I have been reading is that they're basically treating him like Dre Jones. They're wanting him to drop some weight, get a little quicker, and be once a guy that can play the 5 tech and occasionally outside linebacker, and
Yeah.
basically be Dre Jones's shadow in terms of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, which is
And
interesting.
the same thing goes with Rayson Williams, the second from Louisiana Tech, 272 pounds. Majority of
6'5".
his plays in college were at 3 tech, 387 snaps covering the B gap, 135 snaps at nose tackle, and then outside linebacker on Seattle's roster at 370 pounds. And so I wrote his name down here because I don't know yet where he's going to line up.
270 pounds.
Yeah,
A 375,
270
pound linebacker would be interesting, but I don't think in a way that leads to results.
So he's going to have to transition to a new position, which is always tough. So to me, a guy like that is a practice squad guy that they wanted to see if they can develop over the course of the next, full season plus off season. Come back next year, maybe. So the way I see it, if you want to call them defensive ends, Draymond Jones, Leonard Williams, Mike Morris, are definitely going to be keepers. Adams, Levinston, Pickering, and Rayson Williams probably cut practice squad eligible guys. Interior, you're going to look at Byron Murphy, Jonathan Hankins, Jerron Reed, Cameron Young, Buda Jones, Matt Gotel are guys, definitely on the bubble. I like overall, Keith, what we have for talent and rotation pieces in this unit, but it's similar to what we had last year. What do you expect this unit to do with this coaching staff that they couldn't do last year?
Well, okay. You said it's similar, but is it? Last year they didn't have a nose tackle. This year they've got 2. Instead of Jerron Reed being, at 306 being expected to be a nose, he gets to be an interior pass rusher. So used at nose, but only in certain situations and maybe occasionally as a 3. He's a depth and rotation piece instead of trying to be a starting nose.
That's a perfect example of the difference. Yes.
Yeah, you've got Byron Murphy didn't exist last year, and now I think he's your second best defensive lineman out of the name that we have right now. And as you said earlier, the chance to be the best by the end of the season. You're going to get a full season of Leonard Williams, not half a season of Leonard Williams. And honestly, you get a coaching staff that's competent. I'm not. Any listener should already know that I am not a fan of Clint Hurt and the defensive coaching staff they had last 2 years. I put a lot of those terrible stats we started this show off with on him and his inability to put guys in position to make plays. And that's not going to be the case. This is a really good coaching staff. This is a very talented coaching staff that's going to do the opposite.
And add Leslie Frazier to that.
Yeah.
It's like, my goodness, right?
Yeah. So you're going to have a lot of guys in the right spots and doing things that are going to lead to results. And I am all for that. I think this is going to be a huge, even if they'd changed nothing, brought in exactly the same players, I think they were going to get a significantly better result out of the defense because of the change in coaching. But then you add nose tackles, you add Byron Murphy, things like that.
And we're not even yet talking about Uchenna Nwasu coming back full season, by Boye Mafi being in his 3rd season, and taking a jump because he's got better players in front of him and
a guy like
the interior of him.
Like Derek Hall, hopefully taking that jump.
What can they do with Darrell Taylor? Like what does Darrell Taylor look like in this scheme?
What does Darrell Taylor look like with a competent coaching staff?
Right.
And of all the guys, like he seems like a guy that was kind of ruined by everything that's happened on the coaching, because they drafted him to be a 4-3 defensive end, then changed systems, made him an outside linebacker, which he's not really equipped to do. That's not who he is. And then put him in weird spots and was like, here, make do.
Right.
And instead of like taking advantage of his skill sets. And so he could be a massive breakout player this year and earn himself a nice contract with somebody else, unfortunately. But they could get a lot out of him. Like
and we'll talk about the edge rushers in our next show for sure. But yeah, I mean, you just combine it together though. That it works in conjunction with this defensive line we've just been talking about. That's kind of why I threw it out there. But it's just an exciting opportunity. And then you add the back end stuff or the middle stuff, the middle linebackers we got. The safeties, Rashawn Jenkins, I think, and Julian Love work together really well in this thing, and all the other depth pieces that we have in the cornerback room, which is, I think, is outstanding. The
cornerback room's as good as it gets in the NFL.
Yeah,
it really
especially
is.
if Tariq Woolen has an opportunity with this coaching staff to take another jump. And it's exciting. I really think that, just looking at it, that this is a top 15 unit, but it's got to come together and it's got to happen quickly. Like I said, they've got 20% of the thing installed, and it needs to get closer to 100% by the time the season starts, and it's 3 months away. So we'll see.
There is a lot of install left to do, and 20% is not where I would expect them to be. I would expect at this point for them to be closer to 50. And then they come in, the first week of camp when they're, there's no pads the first few days. That's when you finish getting your install done. So that way you're practicing and you're teaching and you're getting better. But yeah, they're just not there. And that's a little bit concerning, but at the same time, it's also, if that's what they're going to be this year, where they're going to be teaching and they're going to run half the scheme or 2/3 of the scheme because it takes more than a year to get it installed. Okay, fine. Then do it and just be ready for year 2, and the roster will be better, and this team will be ready to completely take off at that point.
That's, to me, a worst case scenario. I think that they're going to be fine. I think that, worst possible case scenario is they got 80% of the scheme installed by September 1st. They go into the season and they add little elements week in, week out, specifically designed to counter certain offenses that they were going to face that week or whatever. And this thing kind of rounds out in about 4 weeks into the season. To me, that's kind of my realistic expectation. But there's a chance that this all happens. They've got a timeline. They know what they're doing. These coaches have done this before. He's installed this defense before. It seems to have worked out pretty well for him. So, anything else before we take off? We'll come back next show and we'll do edge rushers.
No, I think the next show is going to be a lot of fun because there's some real talent at edge rusher on this roster. So, not that there wasn't in this particular show with the big uglies up front, but there's a lot of talent at edge rusher.
And the big uglies up front help them a lot.
Yeah, they do.
So my expectation for this group is pretty high. Okay, so let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You know that. Find it on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, share it, leave a comment, all that good stuff. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.